A big welcome to everybody. Thank you for all of you who've already introduced yourself. If you get a chance to continue to do so. And so just note it in the chat at the bottom, where you're from, what's making you happy today. And there's a little button there that says chat to all attendees and panelists instead of just panelists so that everyone else can see. We have a lot of folks celebrating some good playoff news for the Miami Heat making the finals, the Tampa Bay Lightning winning the Stanley Cup, the Phillies unfortunately not making it, but the Indians, potentially the Cubs. So a lot of good news for a lot of folks, a lot of bad news for people like me who might be Mets fans, or even worse, the New York Jets, who are setting new lows for success and relative failure across the board. But welcome in what's a wild year. Really glad to have everybody here. Quick housekeeping notes before we get started. We'll definitely send around the recording and the slides later today, so don't feel like you have to furiously take notes. The other thing I'll say is at the end, there's a survey. There's some things that you can sign up for if you like. It's also really helpful for us to get the feedback. And then one last point is that what you'll see in the Zoom is that there's two ways you can pop in questions. One is in the chat, and then there's a specific Q&A function. And because we have hundreds of people on the conversation today, please use the Q&A function so we can make sure to answer it, and we'll get to as many questions as we can at the end. So welcome, and excited to dive in with everybody. So webinar 18, this is going to be focused on how teams can start planning for Giving Tuesday. So Giving Tuesday, December 1st, 2020. In some ways it's been happening for a few years. In some way this is totally new in terms of the way the world is changing. So welcome, really glad you're here. Welcome Anita from Syracuse, and welcome Tracy from Westchester. So today's agenda, we'll do some introductions. We'll talk about any feedback from last week. We'll talk through Giving Tuesday and the ride that it's been on over the last few years. We'll talk through some strategies in major giving and planned giving. We'll talk through what an actual calendar looks like, and so you can just use this if it's easy for you. And then we'll do some next steps in Q&A. So hopefully there's a lot to get through today. I'm going to try not to speak too quickly, but feel free to post in the chat if I am, and we'll get through a lot. So stay on your toes, please. First things, I know many of you have really had the delight to meet a lot of you. For those who I haven't, my name is Patrick. I am one of two co-founders and co-CEOs of FreeWill, alongside my wonderful co-founder, Jenny, who is just delightful and brilliant. And we work alongside a team of almost 70 people now at this point. And we focus a lot on some of the strategy and innovation around planned giving, around major giving, especially things like stocks and qualified charitable distributions. So much of our research is around how do we make giving easier for donors, especially the really, really powerful types of giving that not enough people do, and how do we make that easier for nonprofits, especially the really powerful types of giving that not enough nonprofits take advantage of. So that's our background. My background in particular, did a bunch of research out at Stanford around planned giving, and before that, actually ran email fundraising for President Obama, where that team was really digitally focused and ran a lot of experiments to help sort of figure out how do we make giving $20 at a time really easy. And now we're focused on, okay, well, how do you make $20,000 at a time really easy as well? So we asked you all how your week is going, and there's some good news and some bad news. So generally, anxiety's ticked up a little bit from 2 weeks ago. We also asked people how anxious they were feeling. Sorry, that's what's ticked up. Happiness has ticked down a little bit. Frankly, this is not totally abnormal as election season heats up. Every 4 years, it typically makes people a little bit more stressed. It certainly would be fair for folks to feel a little bit more stressed in this election season on top of everything else that's happening in the world. Loneliness has ticked up a little bit, but just to give you a sense, if you're feeling some of these, you're obviously not alone, either in the sort of broader planned major giving community or in the world. So hopefully you'll feel a little bit less lonely hanging out with a couple hundred of us, and hopefully a little bit happier as well. As usual, we also asked people what they're worried about this week. And you can see this blue line is a really big spike in people hitting goals. So sort of the other spike that you can see coming up to 40% is around doing my job well. So things are getting even more confusing. For a little while, we thought we could just hunker down for 3 months and things would be back to normal. And it's pretty clear that there's not going to be a that we're not getting back to normal, that there may be a new normal at some point, but things are shifting under our feet and there's a lot to navigate. So some of you are doing it even with maybe fewer coworkers to help out. So anyway, our hearts are with you there, and there's a lot of work, and hopefully this will make it a little bit easier. Okay, so let's talk about Giving Tuesday, and just to sort of level set for a moment, we'll talk through the history before we talk about what's happening right now. So quick primer on Giving Tuesday. Maybe this is your 10th, maybe it's your first. It was founded, well, it's not your 10th, because it was founded in 2012 at the 92nd Street Y in New York, which is a really powerful cultural force in New York City, along with the United Nations Foundation. And it's since spun out to its own organization. In 2019, Giving Tuesday was at least 2 billion, and the odds are that it's likely much larger. So really powerful day. 2 billion is probably an underestimate. That is sort of piecing together a bunch of known data points, but it's likely to be considerably higher. There were more than 20 billion social media impressions about Giving Tuesday in 2019, which is pretty enormous. What this means is that in US, online donations increased by 28% over 2018. So what that means is that the amount of money given online on Giving Tuesday compared to 2018 jumped by almost 30%. It's about $511 million online, and about the rest of it estimated offline. So pretty big chunks there. 27 million adults participated. So this is 13% of the US adult population. It is by far the largest or meaningful giving holiday. The other large giving day, as you might presume, is December 31st. So those 2 days end up being the 2 largest giving days in the US for the year. So 13.5 million folks donated last Giving Tuesday, and then 7.6 million volunteered. And what I believe we'll see this year is a shift to more donations and fewer volunteers, given the constraints that many of us are under. So maybe you'll remember we had a session about this in April. And in May 2020, there was this emergency day called Giving Tuesday Now. So it was held on May 5th. It was the first time. It was as a response to an increase in need from the coronavirus pandemic. So this is not an annual event. This is a one-time Giving Tuesday on top of the traditional Giving Tuesday, which I believe is the first Tuesday after Thanksgiving. Online donations reached 503 million. So almost as much as Giving Tuesday 2019, which people had much more time to prepare for. And so what that means is that you're actually seeing a really dramatic shift online. So if you think 500 million happened online in a day that was relatively hastily put together, and they did a great job, but they only had a couple weeks to prep for it. And many organizations were not involved or participating. So what you're seeing is a really big shift towards online giving for Giving Tuesday, and some really powerful elements here. So why would you do Giving Tuesday at all? And we're not here to sort of sell it for you. We're just here to say, this is an option and we think you should do it. Here's a couple of reasons why based on psychological research. So many organizations plan their own giving days, and that's great. You should do that. But you'll still want to do a planned Giving Tuesday campaign as well. In 2019, 37% of US consumers said they're familiar with Giving Tuesday. So this is a remarkably high awareness rate, given the recency back to 2012, what we said earlier. Campaigns with Giving Tuesday in the name raise 3 times more money on Giving Tuesday than those without. So if you're gonna do some fundraising this week anyway, participating in Giving Tuesday will get you 3 times the results. Before we move on to some new donor stuff, part of this is that people need to hear messages multiple times. It's Giving Tuesday, it's Giving Tuesday, it's Giving Tuesday. And what's valuable here is that you're not the only people sharing this message. So you'll see it a little bit on Facebook, you'll see it from some other corporates, but also every other nonprofit is reinforcing this idea. So if people are then in the mindset of Giving Tuesday, you want to make sure you're there to benefit from the work that you're doing, but also the work that everybody else is doing, driving giving on this day. So the other core reason on top of generating money from your existing donors is bringing in new donors. So Giving Tuesday brings in more new donors than any other day of the year, twice as many as December 31st. So December 31st, you have repeat donors coming back, but Giving Tuesday brings in new donors for the first time. It's 3 times more than a typical disaster relief day, which is going to be applicable to some but not all of your nonprofits. And it's 13 times more giving than a typical day. So overall, really good news. This is really interesting. Donors acquired on Giving Tuesday are 10 to 15% more likely to give again than those acquired on a typical day. So if you can get people into the habit of Giving Tuesday, then they'll do it again next year or in the future, more to a greater degree than folks you would acquire otherwise. So really interesting data here. And part of that speaks to the human need for routine. So if we can get into the habit of doing this every year, it's actually quite comforting. People like to say, I am someone who does this regularly because it brings comfort and consistency, especially at a moment like this. All right, so let's talk about your plans for Giving Tuesday now that we have a little bit of backstory on how Giving Tuesday came to be. So we asked folks, is your organization planning a Giving Tuesday campaign? 65% said yes. 7% said no. 7% are just unaware of their organization's plans. And then 21% haven't decided yet. So if you're in that 21%, we would sort of gently suggest that if fundraising is a top goal this year, and for many of you it is, that you probably go forward with it. We also asked what types of gift people are focusing on for Giving Tuesday, and 62% said cash as a top gift, 53% said annual gifts, mostly these will fall into cash as well, 20% said major gifts, 18% said donor advised funds, also called DAFs. As we go forward in this presentation, we'll occasionally say DAFs. 12% said qualified charitable distributions. These are critically important gifts from older donors, and 11% said stocks, and then the remaining 8% said bequests. So we only ask people what the top 3 gift types they're focused on, so many people will do much more than this as well. We also asked what organizations were doing for Giving Tuesday, so get a sense of what your peers are up to. 71% are using social media, 54% are emailing supporters. This is probably too low, frankly, for the number of people participating. You should be driving that number up. 47% are creating a standalone Giving Tuesday page. 24% are leveraging peer-to-peer fundraising, which takes a lot of work but can be really productive. 22% doesn't know, and that's sort of the big cohort there. And then lastly, we asked folks, do you expect to raise more or less on Giving Tuesday compared to 2019? And this is relatively speculative, and so we'll come back in December and let you know how everybody did. 37% don't really know. 26%, about a quarter, expect to raise more. Relatively few, 12%, expect to raise less. And then another quarter says expect it to be about the same. So generally positive outlooks, either will maintain 2019 given levels or go up. As a note, also feel free to pop in questions the whole time, and I'll keep an eye on the questions that are coming in. Melanie asks, by the way, where some of the early Giving Tuesday stats that we shared around Giving Tuesday last year, and there was a great study by Classy that put that together. So that's the resource there. All right, but many of you have done Giving Tuesday for a couple years now. Maybe you're in the mold. So you can probably imagine this year is going to be a little bit different. So let's first talk about why this year is different. And just for a moment, sort of close your eyes, imagine yourself in December 1st, 2020, and the world will be a little bit different than it is right now, even though we're only about 2 months away. So what I want to do is sort of help everybody step into what life will be like in that moment as we begin to prepare for it, instead of only thinking about what life is like right now in our planning. So this is just part of strategic guidance that we'll do. So first, it's December 1st, 2020. It's quite likely that mail ballots are still being counted and contested through late November. Both President Trump and President Biden, Vice President Biden, that should say, have signaled that they are unlikely to concede in anything but an extremely clear win. And this is not a political statement. Certainly it's been said repeatedly by President Trump, and Vice President Biden and his team, I think, are very unlikely, given the lead in the polling right now, that if things show up and they're down 20 electoral votes, there will probably be some lengthy investigations and litigation. And so just for us to be expecting this, this is probably more likely than not that we're not going to have an immediate elected official here. December 8th, just as you get some key dates in the political calendar, and because these are going to really deeply inform how your donors are feeling at this moment. December 8th is what's known as the legislative deadline for settling election disputes. So all of the lawsuits that might happen in Pennsylvania or Ohio or Florida or Texas, all of these will be going back and forth. And then December 8th is the deadline. So a lot of the stuff will be leading up in the week before, which includes GivingTuesday. December 14th, now we're sort of moving into more civics lesson, is what's called the meeting of electors in each state. And this is where the electors officially cast their ballot for the president. This has been relatively uncontested in most states and most elections. It's possible that there is some contestation here. It's not definite. It may be a very clear win in one direction or another, but this is something that we should be preparing for as we think about our plans, as opposed to sort of planning for something totally different and then feeling like everything got thrown out of whack. So if unexpected, now just imagine it's December 1st. It's a month after the election. We have no clear winner yet. We will be seeing massive nationwide mobilizations on both sides and 24-hour news coverage and people just feeling drained and exhausted on top of everything else happening in the world. So in that world, GivingTuesday may happen while attention is extremely focused elsewhere. And it'll be our work to really bring people back and say, all of these things still matter. In fact, they matter more than ever. So that's sort of the setting that we're going to paint here. For better or worse, it's just likely to be the year that we're dealing with. Other thing to note is that delays with mail have become major news and may likely be more major news as that comes into voting and ballots. And so some year-end appeals might be delayed. And as you start thinking about how to do mail, you might have to build in some extra buffer time if mail is getting delayed. And then lastly, this is sort of some more bad news before we get to good news. It's possible that we're dealing with a second wave of COVID cases and that you're moving into more lockdowns, et cetera. At this point, there's no real scenario where a vaccine or a treatment is widely available by December 1st. And so we're moving into colder weather, especially sort of north of the Mason-Dixon line, if not farther down. And this will exacerbate loneliness and increase time at home for many, particularly older Americans. So as it gets colder outside, there's less to do outside. You still can't do a lot inside. It's possible that spread is increased with dry air, which is true of the flu. And so you're going to have just a lot more time alone for many people. We mentioned in a previous session that about 26% of older Americans live alone, which is a real challenge, especially when a lot of the social outlets have been cut off. So that's a little bit of the world we're dealing with. And sorry to bring some bad news here, but I think we just want to be mentally ready and anchor on what could happen and then be pleasantly surprised otherwise. So some good news here, as we're watching giving happening across 2020, there's some really big trends. So engagement among donors continues to grow. I think more and more people see themselves as part of an interconnected society, and we're seeing that behavior in terms of engagement, in terms of interest in volunteering, even if it's not always accessible. And so people are much more focused on what they can do and how to help others. More time at home is also really key. So even though it's going to feel like, wow, there's so much news attention on one thing, well, there's less dinner out, there's less travel, there's a lot of other distractions that are put away based on the context of 2020. And so there's more openness to messaging, especially online. The amount of time that donors, and particularly older donors, are spending online is almost twice what it was a year ago. And so there's a lot more receptiveness to messaging. People are also continually hungry for connection, and then and what we think of as togetherness, especially in a moment of political division. So if your organization can offer a semblance of togetherness, and that GivingTuesday is something that we as a community are doing, that will be really resonant. And we'll talk more about what exactly that looks like in a moment. And then the other big thing to know is that as the world changes, it increases the likelihood that people will do something different. This feeling of when the world changes, so must we, that unless something is sufficiently different, people are going to do the same thing they did all the time. And so you actually have a really big opportunity this year to change behavior and keep that change going for years to come and set the new normal. And that's why this GivingTuesday is so important. Other big trends that are happening, the stock market continues to go up. And we think that stock giving and donor advised fund giving and some of this giving out of retirement accounts is going to be really, really powerful. And while unemployment has gone up, those who are doing well are doing very well and see this need and are more likely to be giving now than they were previously. We're also seeing a couple of other trends in giving types that I wanted to make you all aware of. So one, QCDs continue to grow. These are gifts from donors over 70 and a half directly out of their IRA. QCD stands for Qualified Charitable Distribution. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Stock giving continues to grow. As the market's gone up, people have realized that this is an incredibly powerful tool, and I'm actually going to walk you through an example of how incredible this can be in a moment. Gifts coming out of donor advised funds are on the rise. So there are two factors here. One, donor advised fund giving always goes up during a recession, but usually a recession is accompanied by a declining market. So these donor advised funds are growing in terms of their investments, but also donors are seeing a significant urge to get more of that money out. So donor advised fund gifts are way up compared to last year. Digital giving, I mentioned people are more skeptical of mail and spending a lot more time online. And that means that not only is sort of digital cash giving moving online, so the credit card swiping through one of many payment platforms, that's going up. What we're also seeing is that major giving is moving online as well. And this is a really big shift. So traditionally, major giving would be all phone calls, and then we go to events or we have one-on-one conversations. Now many of those folks aren't having one-on-one conversations, at least not across the table. And they're also just, it's becoming a more consumerized approach. So they're doing their own research, they have a little bit more time, they're taking it into their own hands, as opposed to waiting for that pull from a major gift officer. And well, I just mentioned this. And then the last thing I'll note is that planned giving continues to accelerate. So as people think about the pandemic and coronavirus and the increased risk of mortality and just that discussion in the media, the amount of planned giving and gift planning and estate planning that's happening is well over 2x last year. And so if you're in planned giving, this is the year to be taking advantage of it and help set up your organization for success for the next 2 decades to come. So what do we actually do about it? That's the whole context, both what GivingTuesday is, what's going to be happening in the world, what are the trends in philanthropy, now how do we make the most of it? First of all, let's sort of define what success looks like, particularly in major giving. Thing one, donors feel close to your organization. This should be happening with GivingTuesday. 2, your overall number of quote unquote major donors, however you define it, and many nonprofits have different levels. For some people it's 1,000, for some people it's 15,000. But that number should be increasing. We should be acquiring not just new donors, but new major donors who are going to help you sustain your organization for decades to come. And that the average gift size for major donors increase. So too often this is ignored as a lever, but if you can get your average gift size to go up by 20%, that's as good as having 20% new major donors, which is much harder than growing your existing donor base. So the number one strategy we would recommend here is using GivingTuesday to educate people on new types of giving. And I'll tell you why. So you want to set a goal of taking as little cash as possible from major donors. Not as little money or as little resources, but as little cash as possible. What we see is that studies show that people give significantly more, and we're not talking 20%, we're talking 2 or 5 or 10x when they give from what's called wealth as opposed to cash. Most Americans don't have a lot of cash, but they have houses, real estate, securities, equities, et cetera. And if you can get in that pool, people are just anchoring at a much higher number. So I might have, a couple $1,000s in cash, but $300,000 in the stock market, and giving some small percentage of stock feels much more achievable. And suddenly, instead of giving $50, I'm giving $1,000. And so you have this different anchoring effect. And there's been a lot of psychological research that shows how powerful this can be. The other thing to know, and why right now, is that donors have extra time to learn and are predisposed to hearing options on GivingTuesday and an end of year. So we have interviewed tons of donors, specifically over the last few weeks, but also over the last 2 years. And what you see is that giving really falls into 3 types. Type 1 is what you would think of as relational. So I've got a couple of godchildren. If one of them is doing some fundraiser for school, I'm probably participating. It doesn't even matter what the cause is. I just like my godsons, and I don't care what they're raising money for as long as it's not offensive to me, which it probably isn't given that they're pretty young. I'll just do it because I want them to be happy and I want them to be successful. So that's one. You have this relational type of giving. Two is what we think of as reactive giving. So you might see a crisis overseas. You might see a disaster here. You might see, oftentimes a lot of political giving falls in this category, where something is so extreme and you just want to make it, it is a reaction. The third type of giving is more structured. And this is what a lot of your largest gifts will be. So this falls into your annual gift to a university, to your church, to your temple, to the art museum, as you really think through your giving and do it more strategically. And those are the moments where you can move people from cash gifts into these much larger gifts. So GivingTuesday, end of year, these are the really big moments to make this transition. So sorry for that aside, but it's really important to think about those buckets. Is this relational giving? Is this reactive giving? Is this sort of more structured and planned giving? Not planned giving in the world of estates and bequests, but just sort of with more attention overall. And that third category is where we can move folks. So there's some great research by my friend Dr. Russell James. And just to leave this here for a moment, he looked at 5 years of tax returns from nonprofits and divided them into 3 categories. Nonprofits receiving only cash, nonprofits receiving any non-cash gifts, and nonprofits receiving what are called securities or non-cash gifts. And what you see is that on average annually, category 1 is growing only 11% per year, which isn't terrible. Category 2 is growing 50% per year, and category 3 is growing by almost 2/3 per year in terms of their fundraising. So you can see the difference here, and it is sort of harder to overstate how important this is. So if your nonprofit is to be successful, they need to get really good at receiving non-cash gifts and asking for non-cash gifts. This is not as complicated as you might think, and we'll walk through what that looks like in a moment. The other thing to know is that as you think about helping donors make non-cash gifts, this is a huge advantage for your nonprofit compared to other nonprofits who are not doing it. And I don't just mean you'll outperform them, but I mean that you have a crowded marketplace of giving on GivingTuesday all the way through the end of December. I imagine that you yourselves can think about how many solicitations you get starting December 1st, going through December 31st. I probably receive hundreds, mostly via email, some in the mail. I tend to do more digital giving myself, but hundreds. And every year I have to decide not just how much to give overall, but also where to give. Donors respond extremely positively to organizations who feel like they're looking out for them, the donor. And this creates both closeness for our first goal here and differentiation. So if there are 3 nonprofits and one of them is going out of its way to help me give effectively, that is most likely where that gift is going to go, as someone's choosing between 3 or 30 or 300 different organizations. Also, what I find is that a lot of people have become major gift officers or directors of development largely because they come out of a really good social good education, which is sort of my background as well, and not necessarily a hard finance background. And so sometimes the math of this can get lost on people. It also gets lost on donors sometimes, but it's incredibly powerful to walk through. So I just want to walk through one specific example of somebody giving stock on GivingTuesday. So we have a person who is living in San Francisco. They make $500,000 a year. So they're a major donor, $500,000 in a pretty high, pretty affluent area. It's an enormous amount of money, but it's still sort of getting by in San Francisco based on how expensive that city has become. A person who donates $100,000 in stock, making $500,000 in California, avoids paying $31,590 in state and federal capital gains. So we often think about the federal capital gains rates of being 15 or 20%. But in fact, most states treat capital gains as ordinary income, and so will layer additional taxes on top of that. So if this person sold the stock, they would have to pay $31,590. Hope this makes sense. Feel free to post into the chat with any questions. But also by donating the stock, the donor gets a full income tax deduction for the value of the stock. So they are saving another $46,000, about 11% again from the state and 35% federal taxes, which means that the result is 77% tax savings for this gift. To put it another way, the charity is getting almost 5 times what it's costing the donor to make this gift. Now, many of you haven't sort of necessarily seen this math firsthand. Some of you have, but most of the donors we talk to don't have their heads around how powerful this can be. And when they learn it, they say, oh, wow, I could give much more. It's not just that they would save money. Say, I could give twice as much for only 30% more, and that's incredibly compelling. And you can imagine how a donor who understands this says, wow, I can be a $20,000 donor for $4,500 of my own money. That's incredible. And this is a really, really powerful element. And you can bet that if this person does it once, they will do it repeatedly and to that charity as well. So really, really, really important to get your heads around this. Look, the value is higher, and I want to be clear on this, in states with high income taxes. So New York similarly taxes income at capital gains rates, capital gains at income tax rates. And so for instance, if I live in New York, if I give away stock, I'm paying not quite, I don't make this much money, so I'm paying a lower marginal tax, but X amount plus my state taxes on the capital gains, and then I'm getting the deduction for that as well. So it almost double counts, and it's really, really powerful. And across the board, donors love hearing about this and just have incredible gratitude to the organization that explains it. And you want to be the people that explain it first. So we actually interviewed we've interviewed donors about non-cash giving, and just wanted to share a little bit of quotes directly from them so you can hear it from their mouth. I won't share the nonprofit because I don't want anyone to get bashed here, but one donor said, why didn't so-and-so tell me about this sooner, right? We're putting so much effort into helping this nonprofit, they could put some more effort into helping me. The opposite was, I was really grateful when nonprofit Y told me about the benefits of stock. And the other donor just said, having more options really puts me in control. I like that. And so being able to say, hey, which of these works for you, puts you in a different mindset where you say, oh, well, I'm going to pick option B instead of picking yes, no, should I give, right? So this idea that you can offer multiple options creates a different mindset in the donor. Instead of saying, should I give, should I not? That's 2 options. Instead, it's should I give cash? Should I give stock? Should I make a planned gift, etc. So really, really valuable stuff here. Just keeping an eye on time to make sure we get through some questions. So when you think about stock gifts, you want to acknowledge that they can be powerful even in a volatile market. Now, some people are assuming the election is going to create massive fluctuations in the stock market. That's probably not true. That volatility and that expected volatility is already priced into the market, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. Also, yes, the market's up and down. Most people aren't buying at the absolute peak. So when you hear about the market's down 6% from its February highs, that doesn't really matter because it's not like most people bought their stock in February. And also, even for volatile markets, individuals can donate stock without changing her portfolio. So you basically donate the stock and then immediately buy the same stock back with cash. And that has eliminated all of the capital gains that you would pay. When you're talking to donors, and we've talked about this a bit, but it's going to be really important on Giving Tuesday, is you can say things like, did you know that gifts of stock can give your family a big tax benefit, up to 70% or more in some states, even in a fluctuating market? These gifts can reduce capital gains you'll pay when the market goes up without changing your portfolio. So suddenly we're saving 70% of cash without shifting the portfolio. Many supporters take advantage of this especially smart way to give. So we're using social proof, which we've talked about a lot, to say this is a very, very common thing that folks should do. The second area that we want to talk through is around qualified charitable distributions. So these are gifts that folks are eligible to make once they're over 70.5 directly out of their IRA. These are another type of gift that people love learning about. It takes them a little bit of time to get it right the first time, and then they do it every year. And so you see massive renewal rates or retention rates of donors making QCDs because they get into that habit and they start associating their IRA account with giving to your organization. It's still better than giving cash because money in an IRA is pre-tax money instead of post-tax money. And so it's much more valuable. It will also reduce future tax burdens for the individual. We have a whole strategy memo on QCDs and how to think about that on our resources page, so we can share that after as well, because we know a lot of people are still getting their heads around QCDs. These have really become pretty popular in the last 2 years. Okay, so that's some of the lens on major gifts. We'll talk through some even more tactical things in a moment, but I did want to touch on planned giving, which historically hasn't always been part of GivingTuesday, but the organizations that do it have been wildly successful. So some big things to know about planned giving on GivingTuesday. One is that in 2020, we're continuing to see this massive spike in estate planning and planned giving. We mentioned this before, but Google searches for how to make a will have hit an all-time high in 2020 and show no signs of slowing down. So you can see that people are really actively making these right now. 3, and this is for most, the planned giving people on the call know this, the major giving folks might not. A typical bequest is almost 3 times the entire lifetime charitable giving of someone. So if you can get that on GivingTuesday, that's a huge win. Plus, giving from folks that make a planned gift goes up by 75% in the following years. So it's this huge valuable gift that too often gets ignored. And this is actually a really good moment to insert it. Why? Because research done by the GivingTuesday team shows that supporters actually have a strong preference for taking more than one action. So you might have a conversation with your planned giving person and say, no, I really want this to happen. And they say, no, I really want planned gifts to be a part of it. But actually the research from GivingTuesday shows that people want to do more. And when we come back to that idea of connection with your organization, giving them multiple actions, get it even closer to the organization, builds a lifetime supporter there. So that is really, really key. And you can use this as an additional way to get closer to your donors on top of obviously generating massive revenue in the future. And then the last thing, for people who are facing economic challenges, which is a lot of the country. Now, it's not a lot of your major donors who are doing okay because the market's so great, but people that really, really want to help can't volunteer because they can't get down to your building, or they can't go out, they can't go outside safely, et cetera. Planned giving may be a really good option. It's a really valuable gift at a moment when they're not ready to make a big cash gift or even a big stock gift. So, your email list, your alumni base, some of these people are going through really hard times right now, and planned giving might be a good option for them if they still want to get involved. All right, so let's talk about putting this into action. What do we actually do? Because I'm sure you're feeling overwhelmed by quarantine, elections, potentially forest fires out west, all this other stuff. And so let's break it down as clearly as possible. We'll talk through messages and then we'll talk through a calendar. So just to roadmap that a little bit for folks. First key message, we've talked about this a bit, is this idea of now more than ever. So 2021 is going to be a critical year for basically all the organizations in this conversation. It's true for folks working on COVID. It's true for people not working on COVID. It's true for people working on racial justice. It's true for people not working on racial justice. So don't get stuck in this defensive mindset of GivingTuesday is important even this year. Instead, you want to focus on why 2021 will be the most important year in our organization's history. So I saw this from our friends over at MDA, which is Muscular Dystrophy Association. And what you see here is COVID-19 won't stop us. Kids with neuromuscular disease need your support more than ever. So it's this idea of acknowledging the challenges in the world and saying that makes it even more important. That's a big shift from saying, yes, there are challenges, but we still need your help. So I hope that makes sense, and really think about that front-footed, almost offensive messaging in your communications. Key message 2, this is really, really important when you're teaching something, especially to people who already feel like they know a lot. So this idea of helping people understand ways to give by acknowledging that they might not know it. So saying you might be surprised to learn, or many people are surprised to learn, or I am surprised to learn, triggers this form of curiosity in the human brain and reduces defensiveness. So if I said, trying to think of a good example here, but I'll come back to something. But if I said, you might, the American flag is the only flag with stars on it, which is not true, but let's presume that it is for a moment. You'd say, that's pretty that doesn't seem right to me. I'm going to start searching for counterexamples. If I said, I was surprised to learn that the American flag is the only flag with stars in it, again, not actually true, then suddenly you're much more receptive by acknowledging the sort of potential defensiveness and really undercutting that from the beginning. So an example, for instance, is some supporters are surprised that they can receive more than 50% in tax savings when donating stock, and more than 70% in some cases. So now you're saying, okay, please open the door to new information by acknowledging this piece of surprise. An interesting sample note that you can use, and we really like this approach, is dear name, it's Giving Tuesday approaches. I want to share a few facts that I found surprising when I learned them. So you as a gift officer are acknowledging that you were previously confused or surprised by this. Did you know that our school, this is for a secondary school, now has graduated more than 11,000 students, and that we now have grads living in all 50 states and 24 countries. So now we're just sort of opening the door to new information. Did you know that many of our alumni choose to donate appreciated stock to our school because it can create 50% or more in tax savings? You can click here to learn more. So now we're sort of in this world of, these are things that other people are doing, and we're introducing new info in a very comfortable way. Did you know that the number of alumni giving qualified charitable distributions has tripled over the last 2 years? Click here to learn more. So now we're sort of opening this space to learning that's really powerful. All right, third message is around togetherness. So remember 20 minutes ago when we talked about the relative chaos which might be happening on December 1st? Here's how to think about this. So you want to acknowledge the challenges and share the resilience of your organization, framing it in this togetherness. So on top of working from home, sometimes with kids or puppies in our laps, our staff, our volunteers, our supporters are persevering through so much, and I've never been prouder to be a part of it. Together, we've been able to do great things. So this idea of yes, we can do it, and yes, we can do it together will drive a lot more giving than yes, there's a lot going on, but we still need to do it. So I hope that's very clear, that differentiation between togetherness and perseverance, as opposed to yes, but things are still needy here. All right, so we're almost wrapping up. I want to talk through a couple of different tactics. So on phone calls, you want to think of this as a two-part strategy. We did a lot of this early in coronavirus, and some people have gotten away from it, but you want to call to check in. So let's say it's sort of, it's November 7th, you've sort of had these chaotic election moments. Call in, just want to see how you were doing. It's a stressful time for many. Then at the end of that call, you want to ask if you can follow up with specific options to get involved for Giving Tuesday, including some ways that are non-financial. So that opens the door to people being a little bit more open to listening because you've acknowledged some non-financial ways. Second call, then you want to compare it with possible ways to help. You want to frame it in what other people are doing. So I just had this conversation with Sarah, and she is going to make this type of gift. But our friend Bill is going to make this type of gift. And Robert's going to make this type of gift. And so you actually start talking through what other people are doing, which makes it seem much more achievable. We, and by we, I mean my colleague Simone and my colleague Magda, who are just wonderful, have created phone scripts around Giving Tuesday for you. We will also be updating them as the world shifts. So obviously election results, but honestly, it's 2020, something else could happen as well. So you can make a note in the survey that you want these, but we'll also follow up with updated versions as the world changes. So I hope that's useful. When you're then when you're doing written communications, you want to include multiple options. So this is coming back to the research that Giving Tuesday did, showing supporters have a very strong preference for taking more than one action. Our research shows, team at FreeWill here, that planned giving in particular is more effective when you have several choices. It just gets people in a different mindset. So in your written communication, you want to include 4 to 6 options on how to get involved in Giving Tuesday. And you can use subject lines like options for you, or something that puts the donor in that mindset of making a choice and being open to different pathways. And then you do want to include some non-fundraising options as well. This just makes it more accessible. It seems like there's more ways to get involved. Maybe you'll have 1 or 2 folks that are going to pick that instead of the giving, but honestly, it's going to give people a pathway who would otherwise have just turned away from giving to do it. and it'll bring them closer to the organization in the future. You'll also have people that want to do it and then say, okay, wow, now I feel closer to the entity, I also want to give. So don't think of this as a trade-off, think of it as an accelerator. All right, so here's a little bit of an example of what it would look like. This is a fictional organization called East Iowa State, and there's an option to donate cash now, donate a non-cash gift, spread the word. So take a selfie with your EISU gear, or even if it's a homemade sign, post it on social media, or make a planned gift. So these are all options, and you're just going through and saying, maybe I'll do 2 and 4. Maybe I'll do 3 and 4. So this can be really powerful, and people really sit with this and think about it. All right, wrapping up in a moment. So here's what we think the calendar will be like. And again, we'll sort of send the slides, so it's okay that we'll go through this quickly. Week of November 9th, this is when you're gonna start stewardship calls to major donors. You're gonna ask for permission to make that second phone call, like we talked about. You're gonna finalize your email calendar. You're gonna post on social media announcing that this is coming. This is what we call priming to get people used to the idea of thinking about Giving Tuesday. If you need to, by the way, this is the time to make your case to the boss and say, we definitely need to do Giving Tuesday, if that's how you feel. If you feel like it's not worth it, don't do that at all. Week of November 16th, then you're gonna send an email announcing Giving Tuesday. We have a template ready for you on the Friday or the following Monday. You're gonna do additional social media posts, making sure it's coming. If people wanna start giving early, that's okay. You can get your Giving Tuesday pages up here. You wanna make a calendar invite. Now, calendar invites are so key, especially as people from working from home from a laptop. What does that look like? Well, this is a sample announcement email. I'll get to that in a second. The calendar invite, it just blocks off time for someone to actually do something. And it's so much more effective than an email that it's definitely something worth doing. So here's a little bit of a sample announcement email for Giving Tuesday. As Giving Tuesday approaches, we've been reflecting on the challenges and resilience. We'll talk about that we're doing Giving Tuesday on December 1st. It's a global day of giving. So everybody everywhere is doing it. This creates bandwagon effect where people want to hop onto it. And now more than ever, EISU needs your help. This is the year where we're going to remake education. So this full template's available to you. Don't worry if you haven't read it as well. Your calendar invite, pretty simple. Giving Tuesday at your organization, you can put a little bit of context in the content of the calendar invite. But just leave it on for 9 or 9:30 in that morning. First thing, get people to do it, get them in the mindset. This is really, really powerful. Calendar invites are probably the least utilized, most powerful medium in fundraising and can be really quite valuable. And then as we get to the week of November 30th, which is the week of Giving Tuesday, start calling major donors on Monday, continue to do that through close of business on Tuesday. You wanna have 2 emails on Tuesday, potentially morning and afternoon. This will be a little bit more the domain of your marketing teams, if that's where you are. Social media posts, photos of the non-giving options, shout outs to donors. This is a really good plan. And then a wrap-up email with sort of a report back, but also a last chance. Okay, so that was a lot. Thank you for listening to me talk relatively quickly to get you through so much, but Giving Tuesday will be upon us sooner rather than later. So I didn't want to break this into 2 separate sections. And we have some resources available to you. These are all always free. Just make a note in the survey if you want us to shoot you an email with them. So email templates and phone scripts, but also both of these will be updated as the world changes. So we might come to you on November 10th and say, wow, things have gotten a lot crazier or frankly, much calmer than we expected. Here's a new version that you should be using. If you want to, no pressure at all, we're doing a full demo to sort of walk through some case studies and different planned and major giving tools that a lot of other organizations are using. So just sign up there. That's Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern. And then also, we've just noted in the past that some of you are in between jobs because of the hardship. And so want to note these 2 jobs that are available to you. Just go to the organization's websites, corporate and foundation giving at Pan Foundation, communication specialist at Rockford. If you have any other jobs that you're hiring for, shoot us a note and we'll highlight them in 2 weeks. All right, so next steps, feel free to start popping questions in the Q&A. We already have a lot. Please fill out the survey that we're dropping in the Zoom chat. This is both for signing up for those resources and giving us feedback. We'd always love to know what we can do better. On October 13th, this is in 2 weeks from today, we are actually gonna do a session on effective writing. So many of you haven't had any writing training since English class in high school or college. And we'll sort of talk through language structure, how to make asks, what works and what doesn't, and a whole bunch of other content there. And so that's really interesting. We've been having some fun doing our own research in terms of what works and what doesn't, and looking at a bunch of different studies across the years to really help you. So if you ever think, I want to be a more effective writer, hopefully we'll be able to be helpful in 2 weeks. It's not going to be magic, but it should be quite useful. And then if you have creative emails or you want to just reach out, feel free to shoot me a note at patrick@freewill.com. So we have only a few minutes for questions, and so we'll pile some of these into a future session as well. But a big thank you. Before we get to questions, because we know some folks have to drop off, just wanted to acknowledge how hard all of you all are working, especially in increasingly chaotic moments. And we know you have a lot of responsibilities to your family and a lot to help keep your organizations afloat. So just a big thank you to everyone who's doing all of that. So let's do some questions. This question is, how does the potential change in president impact tax laws, gift and wealth transfer laws for 2021? Meaning, will many folks want to make large gifts and appreciated stock if we hopefully have a change in leadership? So hopefully, as Brian's words and not mine, we'll keep this relatively apolitical. I think the most likely outcome, Brian, is that in a Biden election, which is what you're really asking about, because a Trump election, you'll sort of have a continuity more than shifts. In a Biden election, especially if Democrats take the Senate, what you will likely see is an increase in the capital gains rate. That's probably the most common shift. You may see an increase in the marginal tax of people making more than $400,000 a year. So that will likely increase people's interest in giving stock. It will not decrease it because the sort of opportunity cost of keeping the stock is lower. So if that happens, if you see some more tax changes, you'll probably see an increase in people giving securities. Jennifer asks, would you recommend getting the annual appeal out before or after November 3rd? We're an ed access group that serves minorities. You might want to do both. And you don't want it to land on November 3rd. But if you do, you could either go earlier in October, which is relatively soon at this point, or after. And what you really want to do is just have a very close eye and make sure that you're mentioning the context. Now, you don't have to be political. You probably don't want to be in this case, but you do want to say, our students are faced with unparalleled difficulties. We're doing everything we can to get them ready for a changing world. Something like that really acknowledges the context and pushes forward in this messaging. Do we recommend mailing earlier? I don't know. You'll have to look at mailing delays by your state. You may want to shift things 4 or 5 days just to get a little bit of extra time, especially with non-first class mail. Scott asks, can you list giving options besides cash? So the major categories of giving options besides cash, stocks, and when we say stocks, we really mean equities. So this includes things like mutual funds, bonds, et cetera. Stocks ends up being shorthand. Giving out of donor advised funds, giving out of retirement funds, mostly called a qualified charitable distribution. So that's usually out of an IRA. Then we get to more complicated giving, things like giving real estate. That's where you'd probably want a consultant's help if you're a smaller organization, but can be quite powerful. Giving things like charitable lead trust and charitable remainder trust. Again, these are sort of like advanced engineering, and you're probably not going to need to focus on that if you don't already know what it is. If you already know what it is, it probably means you're at a more sophisticated college or a big museum that's doing those gifts. Those end up being very, very few a year, and things like gift annuities as well. So there's a bunch more, and we can go much deeper on non-cash assets at a future session. Shotzi asks, we are working with a nonprofit consultant who advised us not to do a GivingTuesday campaign because it will cannibalize our year-end efforts. This person may have more context than I do. I would not agree with that. I think people are in the habit of giving somewhere. They might as well be giving to you on GivingTuesday. They're in the habit of giving end of year. They might as well be giving again. It is extremely unlikely that you will raise less money asking twice as much. In fact, you're probably going to shoot yourself in the foot by not asking enough. If you can also think about in a crowded landscape, which means charities are asking and there's a lot of stuff in the news, you want to make sure you're breaking through because people are going to be giving somewhere, and we hope it's to you. Latasha asks if we have a breakdown of stock capital gains example. We can send a separate document. We don't, but that's a great idea. So we'll think about putting that together for you all. Tracy asks, how can we get more info on the non-cash giving you explained if we're not specialists? Tracy, I think we'll put some more content together on stock giving in particular to help people understand this, because it seems like there's huge interest there. Brian asks the same question. Do you have a calculator for the giving state tax rates? Brian, we just Google it as well. So feel free, if you Google capital gains calculator by state, you'll see that as well. And in most places, it's largely the federal capital gains rate plus the marginal tax rate for the state. Ooh, this is a great question. Liza asks, it's a hard one, how do you square a belief in fair, equitable investment in the commons, aka taxes, with a negative frame of tax burden or tax benefit? So this is a great question, especially if you're sort of in the progressive nonprofit world that is advocating increase in taxes, and there's all sorts of complexity in the philanthropic world around whether to do it or not. My sense is that your messaging is not going to be shifting public opinion on taxes, and so meaning that your fundraising messaging is not necessarily the thing driving it, and so maybe not tax burden, but what you could do there if you're concerned about it is say a way to have even more impact and focus on not the tax savings, but the increased ability to give for the same cost. All right, we are running out of time because there's so many questions, so we'll take a note of these and we'll make sure to address them in future sessions, but I just want to wrap up here and let everyone get to their 1 p.m. or noon or 10 a.m. meetings, wherever you may be in the country. And just wanted to say, again, a big thank you to everyone who's joined, but mostly for all the work that you're doing outside of this. So I hope this was useful. Please drop us any feedback that you have, and I will look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks where we can get really deep on effective English writing, which should be a lot of fun. So take care and have a wonderful 2 weeks, and I will talk to you very soon.